this is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it's time for a celebration of Joel Moss. And we're going to tell stories about my brother. It's interesting. When I decided to do these podcasts, I thought, I wonder if I'm really going to learn anything new about my brother. And wow, I'm learning a lot of things new about my brother. We lived together in the same house until he was 18 years old. Then he went away to school. Then he got into the music industry, and we lived on opposite sides of the country. And typically when he'd come home to visit my parents, he said very little to us about what he was doing. Occasionally we would hear him slip and say, oh, I'm working on XYZ project, or I'm working with so-and-so. And we would get all excited. And he would just say, they're just people. A couple of months ago, I met my guest, Ric Wilson. And Ric, you probably are one of the only ones that I didn't even know existed. How do you like that? I mean, it was like, Ric Wilson, who's he? Are you one of the Beach Boys? No, you're not.
But I have an older brother, Dennis. So,
You do? I love that.
Yeah.
But you started out in the music business. That's how you got to know Joel. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, and by the way, it occurred to me even just today that we may have met a long time ago at Rachel's wedding.
No, I didn't come to Rachel's wedding.
Oh, you didn't come to Rachel's wedding. Okay,
no,
there you go.
No.
So I was wondering that.
Yeah, my parents were there. You met them.
Yeah. We were there. So, and I said this when we were at the celebration for Joel. He's responsible for a lot of my career, pure and simple. The story. Here's how we get to our first meeting. I went to school at the University of Arizona. I was going to be in music. I was a vocal major for a while there. And then I found out that there were a bunch of people who were way more obsessed with music than me. And I thought, oh, I better find something else that's more, that I can have of my own. And I discovered there was this recording studio in the basement of the school. And I, love gear, love all that stuff. So I went down there and I said, how do I take this class? And the engineer goes, oh, this isn't a class. This is just here to record the students. And I said, okay, how do I learn how to use all this equipment? He goes, well, you can hang out here when you're not in class if you want. And so for the next 4 years, I did. And by the time I was done, I was working professionally in town and doing, live work and everything. And then I came back to Los Angeles. I'd grown up in Los Angeles, by the way. So I came back to LA. I started working at a studio in Santa Monica, doing a bunch of things, doing some films, little stuff. I mean, like Warren Miller ski film and different movies, different albums for people, but little stuff. I was just getting started. And I did this one album, which was a Christian album by this one singer, really wonderful singer named Robbie Britt. And I went to Bernie Grunman's mastering studio. Bernie is one of the legends of the business, and Joel knew him well. And we mastered the album, and Bernie and I were talking. We'd done a couple albums together before. And he said, hey, by the way, I just got this new thing, and it was for this digital computer audio system, of which nobody had had anything like that before. And he goes, it's not up my alley, but I think you might like it. And he handed me this brochure. And I took it and I read it and I went, wow, this is really interesting. We're right on the edge. I mean, CDs had just come out literally 4 years before, and everybody was still trying to figure out how this transition from analog to digital worked. So I took it, I called the company and I said, I'm really interested in this system and I'd like to talk about buying one. And they said, great. It's $108,000. And this was in the early 90s. And I went, thank you very much. Great talking to you, click. There's no way. There is absolutely no way. 3 weeks later at the studio I was working in, this guy comes in to record audio samples. It's a very boring project, but it's, interesting. And we're talking one day and he goes, hey, we just bought one of these things. It's called a sonic system. And he goes, I'm trying to hire somebody who knows how to run it. And I said, I know that system, lying through my teeth, completely lying through my teeth. And I just read the thing. I said, let me do this. I'm not up on the latest software. Let me borrow the manuals over the weekend and let's talk next week. Well, I was already a computer geek. I was already a musician. I was already an audio geek. So reading the manual, it totally made sense. And I talked to him later and they said, well, we'll hire you, full-time job, just to run this system for us. Little did I know that that was the third system ever. And this system was, the other two were at MCA Records. And this system was developed for Star Wars. It used to be called the Lucas Soundroid, and then it became Sonic Solutions. So now I have this system. We're making things, and there are a lot of people in town, like Joel, who now want to get their music onto CDs, and it's really hard to do at this point. And so he asked around, and he said, who can help me? I want to put together this soundtrack. Who knows how to get this done? And they directed him to me, even though I wasn't at that time doing that kind of work. The guy who'd sold me the equipment was the one he asked, and he knew that I was really good with this system. And so Joel called and made a date for us to put this whole album together. It was for a completely forgettable movie called Pure Luck. But it was Jonathan Schaefer and Danny Elfman who had composed it. And that was our first gig. And we had a ball talking and kind of getting to know each other a little bit. And immediately after that, I mean, that was a very forgettable one. But then we did two more in very quick succession, and that was City Slickers and Sister Act.
Wow.
So at this point, we're starting to realize this is a good combination. We can do some neat stuff together. And then we come to realize the studio I was at was in North Hollywood, but I lived in Encino, and Joel lived in Tarzana, about 2 miles away from me, if not even that much, maybe. And we were like, oh, so he would bring tapes home from the studio and drop them by my house, and I'd put them into the system, and then we'd talk later or whatever. And so we started just doing a ton of work. And we'll talk about some of the people later, but the key thing about this whole story then is that probably a year later than this, I'm getting very fed up with the company I'm working with, but I'm getting known all around Hollywood for this work that I'm doing. And so Joel and another producer by the name of Ed Mitchell, who I'm still very close with as well, the two of them said, you know what? We will write letters to the loan company that does a lot of the audio loans in town. We're going to write a letter to them because we know them really well. And we're going to say, we're going to give you enough work that they need to fund you to buy your own system and go out on your own. Just those two people's recommendation. And sure enough, that was enough. The people who did it said, yep, we know their reputation. If they say you're that good, we're going to take a chance on you.
Wow.
And so because of that, I quit the company. And they said, well, you can't take any clients. I said, yes, actually, I'm going to take two. You can have everybody else. And it was Joel and Eddie.
Yeah.
And sure enough, the amount of, they kept me busy, and then other people learned. So there you go. There's the start.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you basically were self-taught, and Joel was self-taught in the industry.
Yep.
I mean, I remember as a young kid, we all had to play an instrument in elementary school, and my parents decided we were going to play clarinet. So first my brother Gary played, then Joel played. By the time it came to me, the music teacher said, Karen, we like you. Pretend for the next year you're playing the clarinet. I just couldn't do it. But Joel could play it, and he could play jazz on it as a young kid. He taught himself how to play the guitar. He taught himself how to play the keyboard. He taught himself sound engineering. I mean, he was an architect by education.
Right.
Yeah.
So I see how the two of you really could come together, because you would say, yeah, I can do it, but you had to go learn it so you could do it.
Exactly. And by the way, my wife was an architect by training. And so the two of them would talk about architecture sometimes when he was here, because he would come to my studio and we would just have a blast.
So you mentioned City Slickers, and of course, everybody who's listening to this, I don't care what their age is, they've seen City Slickers. It's interesting because when he was working on that, I believe my parents came to town, and my mother started baking chocolate chip cookies for Billy Crystal. That became a big thing. But what was it like working on that set? Because he never would talk about it, and yet everyone who's been part of it says it was great.
So, I mean, Joel and I actually weren't on set for, I was never on set for that or for Sister Act, right? My part of the work, he was doing the recording, he was doing the mixing, and then we were taking the final pieces. And as a mastering engineer, what I'm doing is I'm taking all of those pieces and creating the final album, and doing the timing and doing the leveling and doing the EQ, so that, you know, the way I often describe it is, you know, the master engineer did a good job when you can listen to an album from beginning to end and never get distracted away from the music. It's our job to make that whole thing flow. So that's what I primarily did. And so in this case, I was putting together those albums, but I wasn't on the set. Later, I would go on set to do a number of films, because again, I had this system that was extremely powerful. And then a lot of film music editors would buy that system because they knew it was the new thing. It's what they had to do. And then they'd buy it right before a new project, and then realize, this is harder than I thought. And so they would literally they'd call Jim Pace in Hollywood and say, who do I talk to? And he's like, go talk to Rick, he'll straighten you out. And I would go on set and be their hands and teach them while we were doing the film. So I ended up doing 12 feature films that way. Yeah.
So is this a system that Joel learned to use, or did he rely on you?
Totally relied on me. Yep. That he's like, he goes, I don't need to know it. I don't want to know it. He had his thing to do. I had my thing to do. And we knew each other's, I mean, after a while, because, so I said we did City Slickers and Sister Act. The next thing we did was an album for the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra, which was The King and I, right? Which was an amazing recording with Julie Andrews, who was the original, in that role. And we worked so well on understanding when the next piece should come in, and how much time do you wait between things, and what's the natural rhythm of an album. And that was one of the things, he really liked, is that I could pace it out and give it to him, and he'd have very few notes because we had the same feel for the music.
That is terrific. So you've been in the music industry a long time, but then you decided to leave. Why would you leave the music industry and one of your best friends?
Well, so the primary reason is that around 2006, when I finally decided to hang it up, then the music industry was changing dramatically. And the people who did what I did, those mastering studios, about 60% of them went out of business in a 3-year period.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, no, it was brutal. I mean, and some of the just legendary ones, I mean, not Grunman and not, Bob, I'll remember his name in a moment. Bob Ludwig, his studio is fine and stuff, but a bunch of other ones, not fine at all. And I was a small studio. I was doing fine, but the writing was on the wall. And it was also less fun because people were buying singles. They weren't buying albums. So budgets were down. There's a lot more pressure. And people were like, oh, well, if we're just going to release a single, we don't need to master it, all these things. So the writing was on the wall that, yes, there was still a work there, but it wasn't going to be as much fun. And honestly, music has to be fun. Right. And if you resent the music, you should get the heck out. And I wanted to get out before I lost my love of music.
I love that.
So
yeah.
That's why I trained on. But I mean, in the time in between, I mean, the people we got to work with, I mean, I was going back and just looking at all the projects he and I did, right? I got more than 60,
Wow.
albums that we did together, right? Just from all these just crazy things. But for example, Rickie Lee Jones, right, did an amazing jazz album with her called Pop Pop that Joel engineered. And that's one of my people always say, he's such a nice guy and he's so even tempered. I'm like, wow, you really don't know him, do you? Because he was a super nice guy, but he also had a temper. If you cross that line, and his line was further than most, but when you cross that line, it was amazing to see. And that was one of those times. He never got mad at me that way, fortunately. But he was doing the Pop Pop album just around the corner from where my studio was. And they had just finished the main mix and everything was sounding fantastic. And they broke for the day. And of course, it's the assistant engineer's job to record, note everything and stuff. And they didn't, and they cleared the board. And so when they came back the next day to listen to the mixes, a lot of his work was gone. And he correctly went through the roof.
Yeah.
It took him another at least 4 or 5 days to get that, to redo that work. And it was just brutal. But it came out great. And it's still my favorite album credit of all time, because it's mastered by, edited by, whatever. And Rickie put in the Pop Doctor was my name because she wasn't used to jazz recording.
Okay.
And so she kept popping the microphone. And so I actually, with my system, was able to go through and remove every single one of those plosives, and clean it up so that she sounds just perfectly, smooth and everything's fine. And so I'm like, that one's fun. That one's really fun.
And those of us on this side of the music, we don't realize everything that goes into it. And I remember the first time Alex did a recording in Joel's studio. He kept telling him he was brilliant. Oh, this is great. And sounded great to me, but I'm the mom, so I'm keeping my mouth shut. But then when I finally heard the final, it was like, that's not what I heard in the studio. I heard bits and pieces of it. And I remember sitting Joel down and going like, but he was great. And he goes, yes, but this part was even better than the other part. And I said, but how do you do that? It was so smooth. You couldn't tell that they were from different recordings. So I find it interesting when you're talking about that you had to take those pops out. We wouldn't even think that they were there because, this is a performer. They know what to do and they know how to do it right. But you have to help them out.
Yeah. I did another album, not with Joel, but with Barbra Streisand. And it was really weird to be in listening to things with her. And I'd have to say, yeah, no, not that take. And she, I love that take. No, not that take. I'm sorry. You're flat here. And, and she, okay, fine. And then we might lift just a piece, right, of another take and put it in to match so that everything was perfect. And she doesn't make a lot of mistakes, but still, it was another ear. And matter of fact, which one was it? I was trying to see. I was thinking about this one earlier. On Sister Act 2, as a matter of fact. They were one of the things I did with my system that was really unusual is I actually racked it all up and I could move it to any studio in town.
Okay.
So somebody like Sister Act 2, they were up against a deadline like crazy. So I was sitting there as Joel was finishing a mix. It was coming right into my system. I was putting it together. I was really working with them in almost real time. But the first day I walked into the studio on that mix, I said, "So what's with the buzz in the speakers?" And they're like, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, there's an electrical buzz in the speakers." And they'd been working on it so long that you mentally filter it out sometimes. But I was the new pair of ears, right? I hadn't heard any of this stuff before. So I walked in immediately like, "Oh, that's terrible. We got to fix that." And they were kind of heartbroken because it's like, we got to fix all this. It's like, okay, I can fix most of it.
So you mentioned in a number of people that I've talked to, and of course I knew about my brother's temper. I've seen it as a young kid, and even as an adult. Luckily, I never was his focus on one. I'm very glad about that. Or if I was, I knew nothing about it. I was in another city. But he really was a perfectionist. He wanted you also to be a perfectionist. He wanted the best out of everyone that he worked with. And so if he was working with you, he thought you were the best. And if you sort of slipped through the cracks, that's what really got him upset, because it was like, I'm working with you because of your talent. So luckily, you were never the focus of that. But did that ever creep into your thoughts when you were working with him that, hey, if I slip up, this is what I'm going to see?
No, not at all. I worried about disappointing him, right? Not that he was going to get angry with me. I was never going to take him to that part, but I was disappointed that and so I was always aware of it. But then again, my standards were very high too, right? And I was going to disappoint myself before I was going to disappoint him. Let's see, was it New York? We did an album with the New York Voices, amazing jazz album of Paul Simon songs. Another Man's Ceiling. One Man's Ceiling is Another Man's Floor. And he wanted me to take one of the songs, and this is a vocal jazz group, and cut it down. And I think I gave him 6 different versions, of which I kind of was like, none of these work. They were as good as I could make them. None of them worked. And he finally had to admit that we couldn't do it. But because of the complexity of the voices, unless we took everything apart, it was never going to work.
Interesting. So you stood your ground. So you stood your ground when you knew that.
No, I'm like, I'll play them all for you, but you're going to agree with me. It doesn't feel right. and I played it for the group too, and they're like, "Yeah, no, this doesn't work." Like, sorry, can't. So when
was the last time you and Joel actually worked together? If you left the industry sort of in 2006, and that's about when you went to New York.
Right, and that was, we mentioned there were a couple of things about why I got out. The other, and he wasn't the reason, but when he went to New York, obviously he was doing a lot. We weren't seeing each other as much,
right.
And there were a few things he still had me do. He'd come into town for other reasons, and we'd do a project together. But at the same time, he had people he could work with in New York, and so he would, we did less together at that point. I think. Most of the Shikaboom stuff, so the Broadway recordings we did, were some of the last things I think we did together, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to go back through and look some of them up and see when did this album actually come out. But that was fun because there were a few Broadway albums we got to do together, But then we got to work directly with the Broadway stars, which was Cherie Renee Scott and Alice Ripley and Adam Pascal. And they each wanted their own album of the music they wanted to do.
Okay.
And so I got to work on all of those, and that was just a blast.
Sure.
And at one point, I was in New York with my family for another reason. And, Bill Charlap was in town at the Y. And so we all went to see him. And then, and Joel was with us. And then afterwards he goes, Tandy and the girls went back to the hotel, and Joel and I went to have dinner with Cherie Renee and Adam Pascal and John Lithgow and all that stuff, because they were all doing Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, and we'd seen we would see the play the next night. But we got to, so that was fun, to get to do those things with him. But and so then there was a while there when we didn't see each other, as much, but we would always get on the phone and chat. And then he would come to LA and we'd have dinner at Rachel's or meet up with Rachel at a restaurant, or he and Ed Mitchell and I would meet at this Mexican place on Ventura Boulevard in Laurel Canyon that he really loved. And so like, great, we're just going to meet there and have lunch. And we'd spend 2 hours just talking about everything under the sun. And that was actually the period right there when he was really starting to worry about his finances. Things were kind of a little rough there, until all of a sudden he realized that all those years he's been working on all those recordings, the Academy had been keeping track of all that, the Musicians Union. And he, all of a sudden, they were like, yeah, it's you have all this money in your retirement account. And he's like, my what? And that he was in a depressed state at that point, and he got happy really quick. And he'd already was with Terry Lynn, and a few years later from that, I was working in Maine on some work with Apple, and then I took a long, when I was done, I didn't come home. I went to Saratoga and spent the weekend with them, and that was the first time. That was a fun thing to see him in that habitat. So
it's obviously to me that your relationship with Joel really extended into the family as well.
Thank you very much.
And I know his daughter thinks very highly of you, as do her children. And so did my husband. And I have to thank you, because at the Celebration of Life, you and my husband, Rich, sat and talked for a very, very long time. And my husband typically was one who, he didn't want to bother you. So he would say 2 words and then back away. But I noticed that's not what he was doing that evening. And I asked him afterwards, and he said, Ric's a real person. And I thought about that, because that's how I thought about Joel. Okay.
Yeah.
And yes, I had met a number of people that Joel had worked with. And yes, they're people, but they're not as real. And that was the one thing that, we both noticed, that you're just this down-to-earth guy. And I tried figuring out for the first couple of hours who the heck you were. And nobody would give me any answer. But now I know you are a longtime colleague and friend and supporter of the Joel Moss stories.
Very much.
So are you doing anything at all with music these days?
I am. So these days I work for Apple. I am very fortunate to have been pulled into the philanthropy team at Apple. And I specifically do educational philanthropy. And so I work with colleges and Native American tribes, libraries, you name it. So I work with a foundation called Save the Music. And the president of Save the Music is on the board of Cafe Lena.
Wow, how
we figured that out because they came to LA We took them on a tour of our new Apple studios in Culver City, just, really not even 6 months old yet. And we took them there and got to tour them through all of that. And we're sitting at lunch talking, and we come. He goes, "Oh, I spent a lot of time in Saratoga." And I said, "Oh, a good friend of mine lived there, and he would go to Cafe Lena." And he looks at me and goes, "Joel Moss?" And I'm like, "Uh-oh." And we realized that we had that connection with us, which is so cool. But we had them here to do that, and then we brought in a group of high school students from Downey, which is south of here, to the studio, and they got to see what it's like to be in these professional studios. And then the following day, we actually went to their high school, and they have a whole music program, music engineering, audio engineering program at their school. So we got to go there and see what they were doing. We brought one of the people in the heads of Apple Music with us, and he got to talk to them and help them make some beats and stuff. So that was fun. So I'm doing that. I just did a couple of big events in San Francisco right before the Super Bowl that were all music based. One of them at the store, one of them at a Boys and Girls Club. But again, where we brought in some of the performers who worked directly with Bad Bunny. We didn't get him, but we got Eladio and Jay Wheeler, and they worked right with the students and showed them how to do things. And at the Apple store, we literally probably had at least 600 or 700 people on the second floor of the Apple store, which is cantilevered out if you've ever been to one in San Francisco. And it was literally bouncing because Eladio was performing after he'd done this seminar with the kids. We brought in people right off the streets who knew he was coming, and we just packed that place. It was so much fun. So I do get to do, and then of course, because of my background, when we've got music programs in New Orleans, we've got language of preservation work in Oklahoma in the tribal nations and stuff. So they always want me to be a part of those because I've got the background to not only understand what they're doing, but to really help them along.
Absolutely. So do you ever get to the Rock Hall at all?
No, I've never been. I have never been. Got to get there someday.
We got to get you to Cleveland. Got to let you do some music up here. We are the heart of rock and roll, although it's still questionable if we really are or not. Was there any one particular album that you thought was your best one that you did with Joel?
Oh, that's interesting. Let me give that a thought. Okay, well, there's one that's an absolute sentimental favorite. And the ironic thing is that we both approached it from both ends of the project, and that was Muppet Christmas Carol. So I actually worked for the Muppets were a client for 5 years. Yeah. And I did all of their albums and stuff like that. And Muppet Christmas Carol was the first one we did. And of course, Miles Goodman arranged it, and Joel recorded it. And then I ended up actually working on some projects with that. I didn't master the album. I actually ended up putting together a whole book and tape of the Muppet Christmas Carol and stuff. So just hilarious stuff. But that was really fun to do. But I think, honestly, I think some of the Hollywood Bowl albums we did were just spectacular. Obviously, King and I, Journey to the Stars, and Heat Wave with Patti LuPone was fun. One of the things I was so excited about, the first musical that I went to a big theater to see ever was Evita. And it was the original one with Patti LuPone and oh my God, why am I now blanking on his name? Oh, that's so embarrassing. It'll come to me in a moment, as they often do. I'm learning that these lapses happen now. But Mandy Patinkin.
Yeah.
Anyways, so I got to, so that was just a foundation for me. I just couldn't believe that, what that experience was like. And I've always loved Broadway. But I got to work with Patty on this album, and then I got to work with Mandy on a different album, not with Joel, but with Tommy Krasker actually. And it was just, those were kind of full circle moments that were so exciting. The other one I would say, and it's kind of a whole group of them, but it was the ones we did with the Clayton brothers. And the Clayton Jazz Orchestra, that was one thing, the Clayton Hamilton Jazz Orchestra, but also just the Clayton brothers. And that was Jeff Hamilton, John Clayton, and Jeff Clayton. And those were just magical times in the studio at Capitol Records. The music was so good, and Joel knew how to capture that so well. I think he did across the board, right? But I think his jazz stuff is really seminal. His Broadway stuff is definitely, and specifically, he was the king of capturing that Broadway album, because you got one day. You got Monday, which was dark, and you had to pay everybody extra, and you got the cast in there, and you had them for a specific time, and that was it. That's all you got. And he did it over and over and over again, and he truly was one of the best at that.
Wow. See, these are the things that none of us would have known what he was doing. In fact, I didn't even know some of the albums that he had produced until I actually went to his website and was like, oh my God, you worked on that, and that. It was like, and his answer to me always was, that's what I do. And I thought, I understand that, but at the same time, to me, it just is interesting that he did have this wide range of musical talent and interest. And I didn't know how much he liked jazz until my mother got ill. And two of us were staying with her, and he demanded that we play jazz music in her room all the time. And I kept saying to him, why? He said, watch her. And he was right. My mother was blind. She didn't know it, but she was dancing in bed. She was enjoying the music. And it was like, when did you get interested in jazz? He goes, my whole life. It was like, okay.
If he played the clarinet, he was interested in jazz.
He certainly did. Well, thank you for sharing your stories, because, when you lose somebody who you really, really love, you think you know a lot about them. And then you wake up one morning and you go, what did I miss? And the series that I've been putting together, it's for me. I'm hoping others will listen to it. But it's helping me get through the grieving period, loving him, loving his friends like you, and just moving forward. So thank you so much. And come to Cleveland.
If I do, you'll know about it. You can bet on that.
I appreciate it. Thanks again, Ric. You have a great evening. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye now.